it is so important that we show up for them so that they can continue to show up for their person. I think that there's this common misconception that
Everything changed the moment Lesie Hackman stood in front of the courtroom and uttered a single, haunting sentence about her father. One declaration, and a hush fell over every onlooker. No one dared to breathe. No one wanted to believe what they were hearing. Right then, it felt as though years of quiet suspicions about Hollywood's hidden corners had exploded to the surface. Even those who'd only come out of curiosity felt the air grow dense, as if the truth itself had a presence in that room. People in attendance had expected a straightforward hearing, something to do with documents, or perhaps old family property. They anticipated normal legalities.
Caregivers, they got it figured out, they got it covered, they're good. I don't subscribe to that. I think that we need to be showing up for them so that they can continue to show up for their person.
The standard brand of drama you might see when a famous estate is on the line. But when Lesie insisted that the story about her father's death was a complete fabrication, every pair of eyes widened. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Even the judge, who had seen and heard it all, gripped the edges of the bench a little tighter. Gene Hackman, the actor once known for his fierce roles and piercing gaze, had apparently not slipped away as peacefully as the world believed. That was just the tip of the iceberg, she said. There were fragments of a darker tale, unexplained changes in his personality, a bizarre and lethal disease that claimed his wife, and a strange isolation that cut him off from everyone who cared. If Lesie was telling the truth, it wasn't just about a tragic end. It was an end no one had been allowed to see. Yet as she spoke, it was hard to tell whether she was genuinely terrified or meticulously trying to mask something.
Do you believe, given his Alzheimer's status, that Mr. Hackman was able to live on his own and survive for those 7 days?
I'm not aware of what his normal daily functioning capability was. He was in a very poor state of health. He had significant heart disease.
Her voice quivered, but her choice of words was sharp and pointed. Either she was desperate to reveal everything before the media twisted it further, or she was testing how far she could go without unearthing her own culpability. When the echoes of her statement finally settled, one question lingered over the silent courtroom. Why would she expose this now? Long before the controversy, Gene Hackman was widely perceived as a private but composed man, someone who had given up the Hollywood spotlight years earlier.
We know from our investigation that on February 9th, 2025, she picked up Zena from Gruta Veterinary Hospital. There was a procedure that was done with the dog, which may explain why the dog was in a crate at the residence.
In interviews, Lesie often portrayed him as an avid reader, an occasional gardener, the sort of father who liked to step away from fame and sink into a simpler life. She described phone calls that supposedly happened every week, scattered with laughter about old movies he once starred in or books he felt passionate about. Many fans took comfort in those stories, envisioning him flipping through classic novels in a quiet New Mexico home. From the outside, it all looked picture perfect, a legendary actor enjoying his golden years with his wife, Betsy Arakawa.
This morning, heartbreaking details emerging about the final week of Gene Hackman's life. Authorities revealing the legendary 95-year-old actor died of heart disease, complicated by advanced Alzheimer's.
Away from the suffocating glare of paparazzi. Leslie's anecdotes only reinforced the idea that Gene remained mentally sharp, perhaps a step slower physically, but still very much himself. But facts can be cunning. Phone records from the last year of his life indicate a far different reality. The frequent calls Lesie spoke of appear not to have happened at all. Investigative reporters unearthed phone logs showing entire months without a single incoming or outgoing call. This contradicted the cheerful stories of weekly father-daughter heart-to-hearts. Friends who used to receive holiday cards from Gene mentioned that no greetings arrived that final year.
After being alone for several days after his wife and caregiver, Betsy Arakawa, died first of an unrelated rare virus in their Santa Fe home.
And neighbors could not recall seeing the actor outdoors in a long time. No one wanted to believe the gentle family portrait was an illusion, yet evidence of a deeper distance between father and daughter grew too abundant to ignore. Had they been estranged all along? Or was Lesie forced to fabricate a story to protect some hidden aspect of her father's life? What made people especially uneasy was how convincing Lesie had been when describing their supposed closeness. In interviews, she smiled warmly and offered small glimpses of a relationship that might never have existed. Observers began to wonder if she was simply defending his reputation or if something larger was at stake.
Let's move on to February 11th, 2025. Mrs. Arakawa had an email conversation with her massage therapist at about 11:21 a.m.
Then came the unsettling revelation that Gene Hackman hadn't merely faded from public life. He was, in fact, seriously ill. Medical documents later exposed severe Alzheimer's and multiple heart conditions, including a history of heart attacks that had never been shared with the public. This information clashed violently with Leslie's repeated claims that he was healthy, alert, and carrying on with a surprising amount of energy. A physician's note in one of the newly surfaced reports was stark. Patient exhibits advanced memory deterioration, typical of late-stage Alzheimer's. Family's decision to keep the condition private noted. No official statements have been made despite the patient's repeated hospital visits.
I can tell you that he was in an advanced state of Alzheimer's, and it's quite possible that he was not aware that she was deceased.
The line about repeated hospital visits contradicted Leslie's insistence that her father never needed such intervention. Even more jarring was the revelation that Betsy, not Lesie, had coordinated every aspect of his care, which led inevitably to the hardest question. If Lesie was so involved in her father's life, why did she know nothing of hospital visits or severe memory decline? Did she truly remain unaware, or was she lying to preserve a public image? Each new detail read like a page from a scandalous script. Gene had not left the house for several months. Multiple housekeepers reported that he often grew confused, failing to recognize the woman he lived with. Instead of acknowledging these facts, Lesie painted a rosier scenario in every interview. Audiences, especially Hackman's longtime admirers, felt betrayed. The more they learned, the more furious they became. Most painful was the notion that the once strong, sharp-witted actor was left to battle a cruel disease on his own. If Lesie was honest that she never visited, it might be mere neglect. If she was lying about her visits altogether, it might suggest complicity in hiding the real state of his life. Although heartbreak was inevitable, the deeper scandal was the apparent effort to pretend it wasn't happening. Betsy Arakawa, Gene's second wife, was relatively unknown in Hollywood circles. She was a private person, rarely granting interviews or appearing at events.
The medical investigator on the case now saying an autopsy of Hackman's 65-year-old wife shows she died of hantavirus, a disease linked to rodents and found in rural areas of the Southwest, including New Mexico.
Yet in the final act of this sorrowful tale, her death stole the spotlight, raising red flags across the industry. The official cause was listed as a rare, rodent-borne illness, which in itself seemed impossible for someone living in a well-kept, high-end property with no immediate risk factor. Infectious disease experts were baffled, describing the likelihood of contracting this ailment in a controlled environment as virtually non-existent. That odd detail stirred countless theories. Some wondered if a third party deliberately introduced the pathogen, but that sounded like pure conspiracy. Others guessed it might have been contracted elsewhere, though no one could pinpoint any relevant travel or outside contact. The more you looked at the puzzle, the fewer answers made sense. But it was the timing of her passing that truly sparked an uproar.
Liz, what are some of the other outstanding questions that investigators are exploring?
Yeah, well, investigators say that they have most of the major answers, but they are still considering this an open investigation.
If Gene was as fragile as medical records suggest, he would have been utterly incapable of caring for himself after Betsy died. Someone with late-stage Alzheimer's, combined with deteriorating heart function, needs continuous care. Yet there were no nurses, no relatives, and no acquaintances stepping in to help him during those critical weeks. Who turned off the security system at the mansion? Why did the staff abruptly leave? These unknowns only invited more speculation about foul play, or, at the very least, alarming negligence. Leslie's name crept back into the conversation. Did she have any responsibility to check on her father once Betsy was gone? Even if there had been distance, even if they rarely spoke, she would presumably want to look in on him. And if she was unaware of Betsy's death, how completely had she cut ties with her father? With every new question, the story became less about a single tragic passing and more about a creeping suspicion. Was there something orchestrated behind the scenes?
The virus can cause respiratory failure in some cases.
A person can die very quickly, within 24 to 48 hours, roughly speaking, without medical treatment.
Investigators discovered that no medical or financial records indicated any recent home nursing services for Gene Hackman. By the time the authorities arrived, the house was quiet and largely undisturbed. Mail had piled up outside, untouched for weeks. Neighbors recalled hearing nothing unusual, no cries for help, no suspicious activity. But they also admitted no one had seen Gene or Betsy for a month or more. Though official statements remained minimal, a few officers hinted this was not a routine case. One commented that the house itself felt staid. Rooms were immaculately tidy, certain personal belongings were missing, and the elaborate security features, security cameras, motion detectors, alarms, had all been switched off. For a famous couple used to maintaining privacy, that might not sound too strange. Yet in combination with everything else, it added up to one glaring anomaly. Did someone systematically dismantle the fortress of privacy to ensure no one could intervene at a critical moment? If so, who could manage something so precise? The spouse was gone, the only daughter was apparently out of contact, and the staff had either been fired or had left under unclear circumstances. At first, the press treated these details as tabloid-level intrigue. Rumors flared. Maybe Betsy had succumbed to depression after struggling with her husband's relentless decline, and that emotional spiral somehow led to her bizarre illness. Perhaps Gene, in the late stages of Alzheimer's, unknowingly sealed his own fate by shutting off the home's entire security network. Or, in a more sinister vein, maybe these tragedies were never accidents at all. In any high-profile death, especially in Hollywood, people line up to propose conspiracies. But for once, the conspiracy murmurs weren't so easily dismissed. Some pointed out that Gene's estate was sizable, including properties, valuable artwork, and residuals from his decades-long career. They wondered if Lesie stood to inherit everything if both he and Betsy died without a proper will. Another angle questioned whether Betsy was the victim of a carefully planned sabotage. And swirling behind it all, the notion that maybe, just maybe, Gene and Betsy had discovered some explosive piece of Hollywood knowledge that made them targets. Wild or not, the questions kept coming. Leslie's every move was scrutinized. She became the reluctant face of the story, the one everyone demanded answers from. Time and again, she insisted she knew nothing. Yet her composure in front of the camera only deepened suspicion. Was she an innocent daughter thrust into chaos, or someone skilled at molding a narrative? In the history of Hollywood, more than a few notable stars have died under peculiar circumstances. There have always been hushed speculations that an invisible hand manipulates certain events to protect powerful interests or quell dangerous revelation. There's no shortage of tragic stories that feel suspicious. Stanley Kubrick, who passed away not long after finishing a film rumored to expose clandestine elite gathering. Brittany Murphy and her husband, both lost to unexplained health complications that many insisted were no coincidence. Isaac Cappy, a minor actor who publicly spoke of Hollywood's darkest corners, later found dead with an official verdict that never satisfied conspiracy observers. Could Gene Hackman, famed, well-connected, and known for having a mind of his own, fit into a similar narrative? He famously quit Hollywood on his own terms. He was never a fixture at the glitzy, often secretive parties that captured so many big names. For decades, there were rumors that his refusal to join certain circles might have put him at odds with the powerful. Most fans dismissed that as the stuff of tabloids, but in the wake of his death, the question felt unavoidable. If he stumbled upon something bigger, something he intended to reveal, was that a reason to ensure he remained silent forever? Betsy's rare disease, the abrupt dissolution of contact, the possibility that both of them were abandoned or cut off from help. It fit uncomfortably well into the pattern of suspicious Hollywood exits. Some believed that after years of near invisibility, they were simply forgotten or ignored. Others believed that isolation was forced upon them by design. One persistent rumor claimed that, in his older age, Gene pieced together conversations he'd overheard at exclusive events decades earlier. A certain producer once hinted that Hackman was dangerously curious in the years right before his retirement, suggesting he'd begun investigating shady business deals, hush-money payouts, or even disturbing incidents that had been covered up. Adding that rumor into the swirl of oddities around his death made it hard to dismiss the possibility of foul play, or at least something more orchestrated than random misfortune. Eventually, the media firestorm and the ongoing police investigation cornered Lesie into a legal setting. While the original dispute concerned inheritance claims, property transfers, and medical privacy laws, the matter of Gene's actual cause of death overshadowed everything else. On that fateful day in court, Lesie arrived surrounded by an air of tension so thick it was almost tangible. Cameras flashed, journalists yelled questions, and the general public watched like spectators at a show. This was more than a legal hearing. It felt like the final act of a drama that had played out in whispers, rumors, and half-truths. Inside, the attorneys laid out the newly unveiled medical records, showing that Gene was not the healthy older man Lesie had described, but someone in a rapid state of decline. They presented phone logs revealing the glaring absence of contact. They played recorded interviews of Lesie confidently asserting she'd spoken to her father every week. Leslie's demeanor shifted from defiance to vulnerability. She admitted, hesitantly, that she had not physically seen her father in nearly a year before his death. She also confessed that her last meaningful conversation with Betsy dated back several months before Betsy herself died. It was a harsh admission, contradictory to everything she'd said on camera. Her reasons for lying, however, remained murky. She claimed it was shame. She claimed it was guilt. She claimed she didn't want the world to see a frail version of her father. A ripple of silence followed. Was she telling the truth about her motivations, Or was this just another facade? Her tearful voice almost convinced onlookers she was simply a grieving daughter who couldn't bear to face her father's decline. But her earlier certainty, that unwavering insistence on a lie, cast doubt on everything she said now. Prosecutors and investigators pressed her about whether she suspected foul play. Did she or did she not know that Betsy died under baffling circumstances? Did she have reason to believe someone else had orchestrated their isolation? She offered fragmentary answers, shaky and unconvincing. She didn't think so. She wasn't sure. She had never asked. The more she spoke, the more confusion spread among those present, as if every word made the truth slip even further away. In the media coverage that followed, opinions split down the middle. Some empathized with Leslie's emotional struggle, imagining she truly felt helpless watching her iconic father grow weaker from a distance. Others blasted her, saying it was absurd to remain ignorant of her father's condition unless she was willfully burying her head in the sand or deliberately covering something up. Even after the legal proceedings wound down, the swirl of theories persisted. Officially, Jean Hackman died of complications from advanced Alzheimer's and cardiac failure, while Betsy succumbed to an extremely rare infection. Unofficially, everyone who examined the evidence sensed too many loose threads. Why did no caretaker step in after Betsy died? Who turned off the security system? Why did Lesie go so far to claim weekly phone calls that never happened? And what became of certain personal items rumored to have vanished from the Hackman estate? Some believed the tragedies were just that, two quiet passings overshadowed by heartbreak and regret, where a daughter's pride drove her to paint a happier picture of her father. Others saw the hallmarks of yet another Hollywood cover-up, orchestrated by invisible influencers who have repeatedly shaped the destinies of famous names behind closed doors. Lacking any definitive proof, the arguments will likely go on indefinitely. For Lesie, this story became a lasting scar, a shadow she might never outrun. In every interview, in every glance from curious strangers on the street, in every rumor swirling online, she confronts the possibility that some pieces of the truth died alongside her parents. Perhaps she's a victim, paying the price for her own distance. Or, as a hardened circle of critics would claim, maybe she's holding on to secrets for reasons too risky to reveal. Ultimately, the passing of Jean Hackman and Betsy Arakawa has become one of those Hollywood stories that may forever straddle the line between tragedy and conspiracy. Fans still mourn the loss of an actor who gave them countless timeless performances. The public remains intrigued by the bizarre circumstances of his final days, ever searching for a neat resolution that may never arrive. Where the official record ends, rumor and speculation continue in perpetual motion. No matter what side of the debate you find yourself on, one truth resonates louder than any theory. Behind Hollywood's glamorous image lies a labyrinth of human drama, stories of estrangement, secrets, and heartbreak that are often far more complicated than any script. Sometimes the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows, and in those shadows dwell the mysteries no one can fully explain.